Moving to Tampa was not an easy decision, and our families were definitely against it. And then, after many attempts to acquire visas to migrate here were denied, it was further proof to our families that God was not in it and we were making the wrong decision. However, because of my British citizenship and the bilateral relationships between both countries, we were finally able to acquire our visas, which took about 7 months. Thank the Lord, our home was sold in about, the house and the content rather, were sold in about 1 week. At a time when house prices were skyrocketing and nobody was buying homes. And this proved to us that God's hand was on what we were doing. My mother's last word to me before we left Toronto was, "Baby, I hate to see you go, but I'm putting you in the hands of God. It's not going to be easy, but nothing worth having ever comes easy. You need to be prepared to fight." And so in March of 1991, we took our 3-day drive across the border and arrived in Tampa, a city that we knew absolutely nothing about. In July of 1991, we attended a conference in Ocala, Florida, and some well-meaning saints, they told us that we would never be able to build an apostolic church in the city of Tampa because it was one of the hardest places to build churches, and many people have tried to build churches in Tampa and have failed, and you will also. I don't know where it came from, but there was a tenacity and a boldness that came over me. And I don't know if I was being rude or whatever, but I said to them, if it is to be, it's up to me. And you just watch, because it shall come to pass, and we will build the largest apostolic church in the state of Florida. About 9 months later, after much soul searching, repenting, consecration, because to be honest with you, I didn't want to be here knowing that I left so much in Canada. But after a very long fast and prayer, the Lord gave me Mark chapter 3 and verse 27. No man can enter into a strong man's house and spoil his goods, except he will first bind the strong man, and then he will spoil his house. The Lord was showing me that if we were going to have complete dominion over this region, research was important. And it was also going to give us a sense of what kind of spiritual warfare we were going to encounter. So I started my research at the Temple Terrace Library. I researched the origin of the city, the people that were here, some of the history in terms of all the atrocities that were committed here, the kind of spirits that we were going to encounter here, such as witchcraft, sexual abuse. We also researched the kind of spiritual strongholds that we were going to be dealing with. We knew that some of the centers or hierarchies of atrocities that were committed were in the city. We knew where some of the headquarters or the seat of Satan was, and how some of these things started. The Lord started to show me intersections, waterways, buildings, plazas, and so much more, that I thought I was losing my mind. And because I had no idea as to where things were in the city, I did not know how to read a map or anything like that, I started to do my research. And that is how we started the research. And I don't know how to read maps, and my husband does. When the Lord showed me what we needed to do, I gave him the information, and between the two of us, we knew exactly where the Lord wanted us to go, what he wanted us to do. He gave us the scriptures, the places, and because of the vision that he gave me of where some of these things were, the moment we got there, we were able to identify what they were and the prayers that we needed to pray. And that is how we pretty much started. We didn't know that Thanksgiving holiday was celebrated in the month of November here in the States, and that the campus would be closed. So, of course, we prepared for a service just like any other service. When we arrived on campus at the Marshall Center, we realized that the doors were locked and the entire campus was closed down. However, nothing was going to stop us from having church. So we decided to bring church to our home. We brought out the 10 folding chairs that we had. We had people sitting on our sectional couch, and the kids were sitting on the floor while my husband was sitting on a rolling chair playing his guitar. We had our normal praise and worship service. We even took up an offering. And then my husband stood in front of the fireplace and preached like he was preaching to thousands of people. That was one of the best service that I can remember. And I am so grateful that we had that service in our home. And at the end of the service, I served baked chicken, rice, mixed vegetable, a vanilla pound cake, and Kool-Aid for dinner. After dinner, we fellowshipped until late in the night. For years, this became a trend in our home, where the entire church would gather in our home for Thanksgiving dinner, and I would serve my famous British tea. The Lord told me that we would reap a great harvest of souls in this region, but we needed to repent for the atrocities that were committed and break the stronghold of the enemy that held this state in bondage for centuries. One of the first things that I can remember that the Lord told me to do was to go to the city limits and to declare in the atmosphere that a new sheriff was in town. To this day, I don't know exactly what that meant, but I believe the apostolics were now in town and nothing would be able to stop the move of God. It wasn't long after that the Lord told me to go to a certain bus depot in the heart of Tampa. This area had a reputation for drugs, stabbings, sexual assaults, and robbery. And I asked a brother Tony Young, if I recall, my husband's armor bearer, who knew the city very well, to go with me. But he refused, and he even encouraged me not to go because of the reputation of the area. I told him, listen, I had to pay the price once before for not obeying the voice of God, and this would never happen again. Brother Tony agreed to drop me off as close to the location as he could, and that he would wait for me in the van while he watched what would happen to me. But as I walked toward the bench where the Lord had instructed me to sit and pray, I felt like I was 10 feet tall, and that God has sent an army of angels to surround me and to protect me. I don't remember how many men were sitting on that bench, but I motioned to them with both of my arms to make room. And I sat in the midst of them and I prayed. And as I walked back to the van, I turned around to see them still sitting there, motionless, as if they were dead. From that day forward, I knew within myself that the Lord had given us dominion over the region, but He was going to give it to us little by little, as long as we continued to obey His voice and follow His instructions to the letter. The next major event that I can remember was when the Lord sent me to the Winn-Dixie on Beers Avenue and Livingston to sit and wait for a white Cadillac and pray for the individuals in the car. Now, even though I didn't sense an immediate need to get to the Winn-Dixie, I didn't want to miss the car. And so I hurried to get there. No water, no sunscreen, nothing. And I sat there in the scorching heat and waited for hours for this car to arrive. I am sure that those people who were coming and going out of the grocery store and saw me sitting there, they must have thought this woman is crazy. When the white Cadillac finally arrived, I prayed for the couple in the car. Those people turned out to be Pat and Gilder Dennis, who later became among the first converts at the Nebraska location. Pat Dennis eventually became a licensed minister at New Life, and I believe he may have been one of the first licensed ministers there. The very next day, Peter, Crew, and I started evangelizing that area. We started handing out flyers in that strip mall and also on Fletcher Avenue, just inviting everybody that would come. We started inviting them to church. And all I can say, wherever you are, Brother Pete, thank you. And may God bless you for all your efforts in helping us to evangelize on Nebraska Avenue. One morning, at about 9:30, after completing a 21-day fast, my husband and I were sitting at the dining table discussing our plans for the day when the Lord took me into an open vision. He told me that we should go down to the Hillsborough River immediately. He showed me a white boat with blue trimming, large dead fish covered with flies along the banks of the river, and people on a boat waving at us and saying, "We know who you are and what you're trying to do in my city." The Lord told me how we should pray and the scriptures to read, and to make sure that we're not distracted by anything that we hear or anything that we saw. I told my husband what the Lord had just showed me, and he said, "Give me a few minutes to get ready." And I told him, "No, there is no time. We needed to go now." He was alarmed at the way I spoke to him, so he grabbed the map that only, of course, he knows how to read. He called my mother, who was upstairs, and we headed out. The strange thing with my mother is this. She was already completely dressed and had her Bible in her hands, just waiting as if she knew what was about to happen. The first two parts of the river that we went to was not what the Lord had showed me. But on the third try, there it was. Just as the Lord said, the dead fish covered with flies and the boat coming. If we had delayed just 1 minute, we would have missed this boat. We did as the Lord had instructed us. My mom read the scriptures while my husband and I prayed, making sure that we stayed focused. And we could hear them mocking us and saying, "We know what you're doing in my city." But as I prayed, I kept repeating in my head, what you don't know is that there is a new sheriff in town. On my way back home, the Lord started to show us streets, communities, parks, office buildings, banks, and so many other areas that needed to be covered with prayer. But how on earth was I going to do this all by myself? I went home feeling discouraged because of the task that laid ahead of us. And I didn't know what to do, but I did the only thing that I know how to do, and that is to meet the Lord in my secret place in the sanctuary, away from my family and away from my children. And once we were done with homework, I headed to the church to pray at about 5 p.m. in the afternoon. This continued for about a month. And during that time, my only prayer was, "Lord, you've got to send help for me to help pray for this city." And it just seemed like it was going to take forever for God to answer my prayer. But one evening, as I entered the parking lot of the church for prayer, an older lady approached me, very petite lady approached me and introduced herself to me as Mother Virginia Locke. She said she was a retired pastor's wife and that her and her husband had pastored here in Tampa, a small apostolic holiness church. But now her husband had gone on to be with the Lord. She said that the Lord sent her here to teach me some things and to reach people that her and her husband couldn't reach. There are no words to describe the way I felt that evening. Jumping up and down in the parking lot is normally what I would have done, but I just froze. And she said, "Come on, baby, let's go pray." But as we walked toward the sanctuary door, we noticed that there were some black snakes with yellow stripes curled up in front of the door. And needless to say, I screamed. And as I backed up from the door, I remember Mother Locke saying, "Baby, that ain't nothing but the devil trying to scare you. But they can't stop us now. In the name of Jesus, girl, give me that key." And she grabbed them out of my hand and said, "Come on, we've got work to do." We went into the sanctuary and Mother and I prayed until about 11 o'clock that night, which scared my husband because I've never stayed out that late, and he came looking for us. When he got to the church, we were still in prayer and he sat at the back and just waited. And when we were done, before I could tell him who Mother Locke was, she ran over to him, shook his head and said, "Oh, Jesus, you the pastor? Baby, I'll see you on Sunday." She walked away, speaking in other tongues. It wasn't long after that Mother Locke introduced us to so many people who had deep roots in the city of Tampa. And we could now get some of the answers that we were looking for so that we could have full dominion over the city that God promised to give us little by little.